to the 40th Amiga reunion celebration since 1985, when the Commodore Amiga was introduced at Lincoln Center. Do people know why there's a 0 in front of the 40? Okay. That's it? When I saw 40th, I thought, gotta put a 0 in front of it. So, and this, I'm so reminded by all the stuff that's going on that we've been doing to try to get the booth ready, that reminds me just of 1984 January CES. Putting stuff together up to the last minute, from what I remember. One of the shirts, hey, we're busy guys, from way back then. What we have here is Amiga engineers and employees, and we have employee number 3, Don Reisinger, who's director of marketing at Amiga Corporation. And then on the end is Ron Nicholson. He was director of hardware development. And next to him is Glenn Keller. Who was responsible for Porsche, which became Paula, the port chip, the audio chip, the floppy disk interface, all that stuff that was in that one custom chip. And then we have Sam Dicker, who started a little bit before me. And if you're wondering why there's a Cinestar out in front of the booth, he is one of the main guys that created the Cinestar from Williams Electronics. And in fact, with him and RJ, who is still on the way to come here, and another fellow Amiga employee, Jack Hager, who was the artist behind Cinestar, and Jack Hager was an artist at Amiga. So it was those 3 guys who created the Cinestar and then were very fundamental for the development of the Amiga. The reason we have that there, the Cinestar there, is to help show that there are a lot of roots of the arcade industry in the Amiga. So if we start with the contributions of RJ, Sam, and Jack, and soon after Cinestar, they all left Williams Electronics to join Amiga because they, I don't know, maybe Sam's going to talk a little bit more about that, but they came out here, and then with that information from the arcade stuff, the arcade influence continued, and there's 2 other arcade games there. One's called the Arcadia Super Select System, and there's an Amiga 500 in there with a 10-slot backplane, which I have 7 different ROM boards plugged in. That came out in 1987. And then the Balicente Moonquake, which is a prototype game, they're supposed to be their next generation hardware. There's also an Amiga 500 in there. And that never made it beyond the prototype stage, Moonquake. There's a couple other systems missing. There's the American Laser Games made, I think, Quick Draw McGee, which is a laser disc game where I saw in country western bars. And then there's a couple other games a couple other systems that I forget right now. I'm going to, since I didn't have much time to prepare for the talk, been busy kind of at the show, I'm going to try to go through what I recall, what we started with in when I started at Amiga. It was 1983, and there was no hardware. We had documents that Rob Peck had prepared. Sam had already been there for maybe a month or so. He was manager of entertainment software, and coming directly from Williams. And so we had to start writing code without any hardware. We had documentation say, well, this is how the hardware will work. Imagine how it will work and what will happen when you do this. So what were we to do? We were running using a Sage 4, which ran the Idris multi-user operating system. We could connect 4 terminals. We use televideos, and there's if you get I'm sure you'll probably get a chance to go to the booth, and you'll see if you go online and look for 1984 Amiga CES January, you'll eventually come up and see pictures, and we are trying to bring back that memory of that CES. What's out in front is the Atari systems, because at that time Amiga was only selling joysticks and joyboards and some games, and everything else at CES though was VIC-20s and PETs and Radio Shacks. And if you can imagine the state of the industry back in 1983, there was no Mac, was the Sun out yet? But some of these are real expensive. There was a ColecoVision, there was Mattelvision. These are some of the things that people were used to playing their games using as their personal computers, Altairs and stuff like that. The PC was out. You could add a bunch of stuff to the PC and finally make it a get graphics better. But this was, imagine as you're walking into the Amiga booth and you're seeing all this, you got to kind of transport yourself back in time if you were born by then, or even if your parents were born by then. And then being asked to sign a non-disclosure and maybe seeing what's behind the curtain. As we went along during the development of the software, I decided that I couldn't program this blitter without a way of seeing its output. So I took the documentation of the blitter and wrote a blitter emulator, so then I could see how it worked, so that when the hardware would be available, I could just replace my software emulator with the poking the registers of the blitter. That worked actually really well. Carl was there, working on exec. Sam was working on a lot of stuff, and RJ was there. There are pictures available that actually Carl has posted on his Facebook page of pictures of inside the software cave, where you see monitors. He tells you who the names they are. Is Carl here? No, not yet. So I was looking at my notes, and I noticed that one of the notes said, hardware really available December 2nd, 1983. So, and the January CES show was supposed to start like January 7th or 6th. And if we had real hardware on December 2nd, we had a little bit more than 30 days to try to get everything working with the real hardware and show what we see inside the booth. Personally, I think it's a miracle. So, in the booth, you'll see a lot of artifacts. There's talk about 3 airplane seats bought for Amiga breadboards. We still actually have those boxes. I brought one box along with a face still drawn on it. We have the Sage 4. We have a lot of stuff in there, and I think I'm ready to. We'll just check the booth out, and if you have, maybe we have time for questions. I think that's about all I have to say. So I'm going to pass it on to Don Reisinger.
high tech here. There we go. Okay, there we go. Thanks, Dale. I look around these exhibits and what's gone on here, and then harken back to the 30th, and coming back from my Midwestern roots, I really feel like a pig in church. The brain power in this room and in this building today is just absolutely phenomenal. Give you just a brief background. My career I started a long, long time ago, and a lot of you weren't alive then. That was back at Sears. Learned retail, ended up in the buying department at Sears, and then left and joined Tonka Toys. And that's where I hooked up with Dave Morris, who was employee number 1. Worked for Dave directly for about 5 years in a whole range of different sales and marketing positions. So I got kind of disappointed at Tonka, and Dave knew about it, and he said, just hang on. And I had no idea what he was up to, and he gives me a call one day, and he says, I need to talk to you in person. When are you coming to California next? And I said, in about 5 days. I had to go to Los Angeles to talk to Honda about a license. He said, here's what I want you to do. And again, you can't do that today. He said, go there, change your ticket, fly to San Jose, I'll get you a ticket to LA, you know, we'll take care of this thing. So I fly out here and we sit down, we go through the business plan. And I'm like, Dave, I don't know anything about computers. And he said, that's okay, you'll learn. And so, and he was right about that. But he said the first thing is we need financing to keep this thing up and going, and that's the video game stuff. And Dave and I had, and part of the reason I was disappointed at Tonka is we had been after the senior management at Tonka to get into electronics. And they had made some kind of half-hearted efforts, but they really weren't willing to make the big jump. And so that was very attractive. And so, you know, we made the call, yep, we're going to come on out here. And shortly after that, a bunch of the other Tonka sales and marketing guys joined us, so that in a very short period, I think it was late October, no, first part of November, I actually made the move. And that following February, we actually had a display somewhat similar to what we have out here, because that was the basis of the displays that we used for all of those shows. And we had that stuff going, and we had all the prototypes of those products, and we were a hit. We absolutely knocked these guys dead, because we had all the contacts. And back in those days, their toy departments were handling video games. There wasn't a video game department or club or anything like that. And so we knew who to call. We had great contacts at the major players, and everybody loved what we had. And so we started off with a big bang. And so that's how that whole thing got started. Going back to getting started, I remember the first day I actually stepped into the place over there in Santa Clara. And Dave, around 4 o'clock or so, Dave goes, he said, I got to run. He said, why don't you sit down here with Jay, and I think Joe DeCure, and Ron, I'm not sure if you were there or not that first day that I was there. And these guys start talking this technical stuff. Now remember, I don't know anything about computers. And they're talking about bus. And I'm going, I thought we were doing a computer. What are we talking about a bus for? I mean, this is literal. And I got done about 9 o'clock that night and went to the hotel, and I can remember laying in bed staring up going, what in the hell have I done here? But all of the guys that I worked with there understood that I was a real novice in this computer thing. And they found a way to communicate with me at my level that I got to understand this. So I do know what a bus is now. And so enough about that stuff. Marketing a product like the Amiga computer was probably one of the easiest things I could have been assigned ever in my career. You don't get an opportunity very often to be involved with a quantum leap product like this. I was talking with someone on the floor, and we were talking about, yeah, you know, there are people still doing stuff. And it's like, yeah, 40 years later, we're still doing stuff with the Amiga computer chips, and that stuff's still alive. My memory ain't what it used to be, but boy, I can't remember a whole lot of products that were introduced back in 1985 that are still out there and performing at top-notch levels. We have wonderful memories from strictly from the sales and marketing side. Most of them go back to that January show in Chicago, where we had this very, very large booth with a very, very small amount of product up front, looking a lot like what we have out here on the floor. And then out of the back side of this was all kinds of strange, there's Carl. Hey, Carl Sathenrath. All right, Carl. Strange sounds emanating and people going, what in the world is going on there? And we were very, very discriminating in terms of, you know, who was going to be let in. Most of it was done by appointment in advance. And so it wasn't a whole lot. How many would you guess, Dale? How many would you guess that we showed it to the first show, that over the course of those 3 days?
At January CES, I would guess a lot, but I would say more than 100. But I mean, there were repeats because on the last day, because the bouncing ball was born on the night before the last day, everyone wanted to come back and see the new demo.
Yeah, that's right. This was a classic. There was a wonderful Italian restaurant in Las Vegas that has not survived 40 years. And we all went out for this dinner, and here's these two guys, this guy and RJ, and they're at the end of the table, and they're just having the most wonderful time, all by themselves. And we're going, the rest of us going, what in the heck are these guys? So, it was a van, right? We had a van.
Right.
Yeah, so we haul everybody else back to the hotel, and these guys take the van and go back. Now, I never figured out how they snuck back in the building because it was locked up tight. We come in the next morning, and it's like, where are RJ and him? We open the door to that back room, and there they are on the floor, sleeping. And on the screen is the bouncing ball. And there were probably a collective, oh my gods, that you've probably would have been heard throughout the entire place. And then, of course, wherever we could, we got guys back. If the rotating polygons wasn't enough to convince people that this was something that they'd never seen before, that bouncing ball did it. And so from there on, understanding that we had that product, my job got really easy. And when Commodore took over, I hung in there and managed the western region for sales. So I had everything pretty much from the Colorado Rockies to Hawaii. I got Hawaii and Alaska. And going out with the sales crew that we had put together at that time and selling that product, it was literally like selling water in the desert. Because the computer guys were just over the moon. But it was a bit of a challenge because one of the things that I noticed very early on was that the computer business back in those days was an awful lot about the technology and not about the applications. A guy who I knew because of my involvement in the toy industry had been involved at Coleco and had left Coleco, and he had started doing seminars. And Billboard had a seminar out here. They were talking about all this stuff. Now, Amiga did not exist at that time other than a concept. So we went up there and we were talking about this, and I asked him, I said, this is all well and good, but what are you going to do with this computer? I mean, My brother-in-law had bought us an Apple II. My kids kind of got it. I tried. This ain't for me. And so my point was, what are you going to do with this thing? And got down to the point of saying, nothing is going to be ultimately successful unless you can basically find an application that is the equivalent of a toaster, that you can hardly imagine existing without it. And it took a long time for that to come along. I'm not sure, and I'm sure a lot of opinions on that, but it may have been the internet that finally made computers that appliance that you gotta have, that it's hard to exist without it. Today, I don't even know how I would exist at my age, retired, without access to the internet and the computer. And so what the marketing side got done, and that's where, again, I think we stepped in a significantly different way, was when we launched, we had software. It wasn't the greatest in the world, but by God, you could do stuff with that computer. And that was probably one of the biggest differences. And it made that initial success on the Amiga what it was. So I think that's it for me, Dale. I'm going to pass it on to Sam.
All right. Thanks, Don. So I was going to try to go in chronological order. So the next would be the hardware guys, and then it would be Sam and Mike Slivkak, and when RJ gets here, RJ. So next on the list is Ron Nicholson, who was probably the next employee after Don.
Okay. First, I just want to check the audience out. How many of you either have an Amiga or know of an Amiga that's still running? So that's a huge difference from other computers from 40 years ago. Let me set the scene. At the time of CES, the announcement that just occurred before was of a famous computer from IBM, the PC Junior. That was the competition, to set the scene about what we were doing and a significant difference. Let me start in chronological order, because there are a couple names I have to mention. How I got involved in this project at all. Actually, it was Steve Jobs who introduced me to Jay Miner so we could do a chip for the Macintosh. Jay Miner then introduced me to Dave Morse, who talked me, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, into coming to Amiga. So without Dave Morse and Jay Miner, this project wouldn't have existed. They are no longer with us, but they were the key people. Something just occurred a few months ago, a sad passing. Dale mentioned, and he wrote an emulator for the Blitter, but how the Blitter came about is actually another famous person who recently passed away, and that's Bill Atkinson, who did the graphics for the Lisa and the Mac. And actually, how did I, yes. Brilliant engineer, what's the connection? Well, in hallway talk at Apple, Bill Atkinson and Bill Budge would actually talk about how to implement a Blitter in software, and they would do it in the hallway right outside my office. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should learn how to write a Blitter in software in 4th and 6502 assembly code, which is a little silly. And that actually became the prototype for the hardware Blitter when I got talked into going to Amiga. How did I get talked into going to Amiga? Oh, very simple. I was working on the Macintosh, which is a very exciting project, but Dave Morse came up and said, you could work on Macintosh where you're doing a disk controller chip, or you can come work with me and do a color video game machine. What do you think I did? So that's how I ended up on the project. Let's see, to talk a little bit more about what I did related to what was demoed. The actual board in the demo was one that I wire wrapped. I wire wrapped, I think, 3 prototype motherboards, either 2 or 3. It's 40 years ago. I can't remember that one.
That would be the board with the 68,000 on it and the DRAM for the code.
Okay. Let me back up a little. The breadboards were done for 3 reasons, not just to do a demo. One, back then, when designing chips, the CAD tools we had were a teletype and a remote modem, so they could run SPICE on the chips using a service. I think it was in Berkeley. They were renting a SPICE server there to do the simulation for the chips. That was Mark Chu and Mike Chu, I think. And anyway, so the technology we had back then was pencil and paper. And before the pencil and paper, to do the design, we did the architecture, and the architecture wasn't done like nowadays by writing out RTL. We actually had 3 large whiteboards, and who first started drawing on those whiteboards? Well, it wasn't Jay. Jay was still stuck at Zymos because the investors at Amiga wanted him to finish a pacemaker chip. So Dave Morse had to find some people to start the project right away, and the person who started even before me was, in the audience here, Jay DeCure, who was the first person to work on the hardware of the Amiga. We were all very lucky.
I was prepared because I'd worked for Jay Miner twice before. So in October of 1982, he took me on a ride of his boat up the Delta. I was very well prepared because I'd worked for Jay Miner twice before. And so he took me on a ride up in his boat in the Delta, and we resurrected a document that I had proposed at Atari in 1979. So we started sketching on the whiteboard. And we benefited greatly because he used to listen to Dave Atkinson. Bill Atkinson, because the original message from Dave Morse, he wanted us to build a machine that could animate cartoons in real time. We needed a lot of graphics acceleration. And he took his ideas and we put them in hardware.
Mike goes. Thanks, Joe. So anyway, the 3 original key people for the architecture, Joe DeCure, myself, and Jay Miner. Jay Miner being the mentor for both Jay DeCure and myself, and how to learn to design chips of that magnitude given the primitive technology back then. Whiteboards, pencil and paper, colored pencil, tape on Rubylith, I think, for the final layout. So, but the breadboards first were not to demo, but to prove that we could actually implement the stuff we drew on the whiteboard. So we actually had to start drawing up slightly different logic, since it was TTL rather than NMOS that we needed to breadboard. And so another person who's not here, Dave Needle, was actually in charge of a lot of the logic conversion from our block diagrams to something that could be implemented in a breadboard. So again, we should remember some of the key people involved in this. Yes. Yeah. So first, the breadboards were designed to verify that the logic works, since we had no logic simulators back then. Actually, Amiga eventually, about the time I left, brought in, I think it was a Data General Eclipse to start doing some simulation. Is that correct? Do you remember they bought a Data General to do some simulation, or you don't recall that? Okay. So I'll have to verify that with some other people. But anyway, no electronic CAD tools were used except for some SPICE models. So we did a lot of pencil and paperwork to design the logic, and that eventually got implemented in the breadboard towers that you can see back there in the exhibits. So we had the breadboards. They sort of verified the logic worked. They also allowed us to develop some ideas. One of the ideas, which Dell did not mention, was when looking at the schematics for the breadboard, realized that I had enough leftover logic in the blitter to add one feature. Could you talk about that, Dell?
Yeah, it was actually from not looking at the logic of the schematics, but since I wrote this blitter emulator, and I'm looking at, and it was a function, it was a clock level state, it was a state emulator. Because it had several states, state 1, state 2, it would clock things in, clock things out. There's a state to shift things around. There's a state where all the min terms are applied, and then there's a state when things are written out. There's a state when things are read. And I wrote this code up, and I had worked at Hewlett-Packard before, just before Amiga, and I had done a lot of graphics software there, and we implemented the Bresnan line drawing algorithm, and I'm looking at that, I'm going, if I just change a couple of lines of code, I can make the blitter draw lines, and including pattern lines by rotating what we made into a pattern register, and eventually we could add, because I think there was like a fill process in the blitter already, but
which I learned from Bill Atkinson.
Right. So basically, quickly a fill algorithm will turn on fill mode when it encounters a bit in the raster, and then turn it off when it encounters another one. So it's kind of an XOR thing. The challenge was to generate this mask of bits into a bit plane quickly, and then fill them using that filling thing. So prior to this, we would be drawing lines with the processor, the 68,000, bit by bit, and then. And since I'd actually written a polygonal area fill at Hewlett-Packard, I knew how this worked, and I said, well, I think we can do like these one-dot modes and other tricks in the line drawer, so that when it created this pattern in a bit plane with using line draw in this mode, it created a perfect pattern to then run fill on.
Yeah, so that's a great example of software-hardware co-design, where Dell found something by writing a simulator for the hardware that could add a feature. He actually had to twist my arm to get me to add it to the breadboards, because we were running way behind schedule. But I think he and Dave Needle figured out how to do it with only like a few more chips.
Right. Well, there's kind of a story behind that twisting of the arms. I think that came in November. And so it wasn't just before CES. It came in November, according to the notes that I have. But everyone, including Jay and Pariso, everyone said, Dale, we can't do this late change to the hardware. It's just too late. And Jay was told to take me to lunch and convince me to drop it. And so he took me to Denny's for lunch. Yeah, you really twisted my arm. So I brought all my notes. I brought my source code and my blitter emulator, and I said, and after I heard what Jay said, I said, Jay, this is all we have to do. Change these. This is the blitter emulator. This is what it does in this state. We change these couple of states based on being in line draw mode, and we came back, and I think he said, let's do line draw.
So anyway, that's one of the fun stories about how the chip development process, we actually were flexible with that allowed some great ideas to come along. So,
yeah, I think it was mainly, he talked to Dave Needle, and Dave Needle said, oh, sure, we can do that in a day.
Yeah, Dave had to convince me, but he convinced me. Yeah. So we talked about the breadboards for verification. We talked about the breadboards to allow us to tinker with the logic a small amount and not only fix things but add things. And the last thing was Amiga at that time was running out of money. We needed to create some buzz so that we could get some either investment or maybe some channel pre-orders or something like that to keep the company going, because the company was very close to going under. It was pretty much a miracle that this company managed to get done, both technically and business-wise, what it accomplished.
Just a sec. Hello, RJ.
Oh, we have one more person here. We have yes.
Very happy you could join us.
Yeah. RJ comes a little bit after me, so we'll still talk about the hardware, then we'll get to the brilliant stuff that more software people did. So we needed to put together something that could create some excitement. We were under some constraints, like I think Reisinger said, maybe 100 people we showed in the booth, and that was specifically for a reason. We didn't want to announce the product back then, but we wanted to generate buzz for investment and for channel. So that was the main thing we set up in the booth, and we needed to show something to validate, hopefully to get enough, interest in the company. And I guess that eventually came along when both Atari and Commodore sort of ended up in a bidding war for, the remains of Amiga before it was about to go under, which was like right on the edge. I think it was, we were weeks away from going under. And then first Atari came in, and then we, via some clever negotiation, that's another story to be told, we ended up getting funded by Commodore. So what was shown was successful. It was, again, the technical accomplishment. We were showing something a month after the PC Junior was announced. So we definitely could do better than that, but I think Dave Moore set the goal that we wanted to be like 10 times better than anything else in the show. And I think the press did say that we were significantly better than anything else at that CES show. And I think that's most of what I have to say about the hardware. I guess I could, for the rest of the hardware, I should pass it off to Glenn.
Move on to Glenn. Glenn Keller, in charge of the audio, Porsche, Paula chip, floppy.
Thank you, Dale.
Yeah,
it's working. So my story, I'll start in 1980. I was working on alternative energy at the University of Edinburgh, and just thought I might want to move back to the States, so I spent about a month wandering up and down the West Coast. And a couple of years later, the funding got cut, and I got on a bus and ended up in San Francisco with a few bucks in my pocket and master's degree and a bit of experience. And so I had a dime left at one point, and I'm in the subway tunnel and looking for ocean engineering jobs, and this guy, Joe DeCure, answers the phone. And he says, it sounded like he had some stuff that was vaguely ocean engineering related, and he said, I don't have anything, but you need to go talk to my friend Jay. So I got on the old Cal train and wandered down to Sunnyvale Station, and there's this guy with a big old beard sticking out of one side of a Lincoln Continental, and out the other side is this tiny little dog, yapping and barking. And I thought, this is a guy I got to work for. And of course, his name was Jay Glenn and mine was Glenn Jay, so that kind of... Plus, I guessed the difference between a latch and a flip-flop correctly. Anyway, so that was my start at Amiga. And I think Joe had this wonderful phrase, I think it was you, that was off the boat from Scotland, Never designed a chip before, didn't know anything about Silicon Valley, and so I did the chip with the leftovers, the audio, the disk controller, the UART, and learned a lot, had a lot of great fun, and yeah, it was amazing, just amazing. But it was interesting because I saw Don Galbraith's name the other day, and I thought, wait a second, this whole toy company thing is interesting, because one of the guys I had talked to as a headhunter when I was looking for jobs had said, what's that little furry thing on your resume? And in the end, we started a little toy company making these little things that purred when you pet them and squeal if you squeeze them too hard. And so he ended up in the toy industry for the rest of his career. And the lobby of Amiga was covered with fur, you know, big sheets of fur for a while. So that's, anyway. That's one of the things that happened. So, and then the curious thing about this whole thing is the people at Commodore and the engineers were incredible. The story I like to tell is Jay put me in charge of cost reduction. And I looked at what Headley and Jeff could do, and I said, no. They're like 100 times better than me at this, and that was, the result was the Amiga 500. So, you know, there was, you know, still are incredible engineers out there in Westchester, and in fact, I live there now. And the Commodore building is now a QVC place. So that's my story.
Thank you, Glenn. Yay. So next is Sam. Sam Dicker. Hello?
Okay. Yeah, so let's see, I got my start really in coin-op video games. I miraculously got a job at Williams in the first coin-op boom, and was really lucky to be there at the right time, and I got to work with Eugene Jarvis and make Defender, and it was very, very exciting, and I thought, I'm going to stay at this company in this industry forever. This is the best thing in the world. And then after that, I started a game that ended up being Sinistar, and worked with RJ and some other geniuses, and then there was the coin-op crash, and I think Sinistar came out right at the beginning of the crash, and it was a time when pretty much you'd find a video game console anywhere you could put one. They were in every corner store, every gas station, every bar, everywhere, and there weren't any places for new ones, and the operators of the games who didn't want to buy new cabinets. They wanted conversions. They wanted anything they can do to get more money, milk more money out of what they had already bought. And that could no longer support this big industry. And so reluctantly, I started looking for something else, something new, something else to do. And I interviewed at a bunch of companies, and I just could not. You know, after working on coin-op hardware, we actually had a blitter on our boards, and I could not go to work to make Atari VCS games, but I stumbled across this Amiga project, and when I first went to visit them, they showed me a whiteboard, and that had a layout of the basic architecture and its capabilities, and to me it was like science fiction. It was so far ahead of anything I had seen or heard about, that I decided I'm gonna join this team. And because I was in the game industry, they wanted me to be in charge of entertainment games, and I accepted that, although I'm not a manager type person. I'm much more of a coder, and so I mainly focused on, writing code. But I brought along a couple of I recruited a couple of my folks from Williams, RJ and Jack Hager, and I don't know, Jack, maybe RJ can help convince him. I don't know who, but anyway, I brought those guys along because they were a lot of fun to work with and super talented. And anyway, what kind of stories can I tell? I loved sound stuff, so I worked with Carl. I wrote one of the first drivers using exec, and I used the Paula chip and 4 channels of audio, which was like amazing. And let's see. And then there was a big focus on writing demos, and should I tell the story about the ball?
I've got a question you could answer.
Okay.
Speaking of demos, I got a question you could answer. Where did that sound come from for the Boing demo?
Yeah, well, that was after the show.
That was after January CES.
Just for CES.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed the beginning, you guys.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, I'll tell the story of the spinning ball, you think?
Right, yeah. So
sure.
So you've all heard of the Boing ball. The Boing ball didn't just magically be born bouncing left and right and rotating and with the audio going, with the bong going on. It started with a demo that Sam wrote.
Yeah, so there was a period where we were waiting for these boards to be up and running, and we had I think what were we using? I remember I had an Atari.
We had an Atari 800.
Yeah, I remember I was using that, and I think we did
That very same one we have in the booth.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I was very very excited. Dale, I was in the faction that wanted the line drawing and the filling algorithm, and I was also on that camp, although I didn't have much say in the matter. But I thought that would be a lot of fun to play with, but I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could animate something with that? But we didn't have the hardware. I mean, we could draw the polygons, and I probably used your software your emulation software to draw them, but obviously they were really, really slow, the software fill and line draw, and I had an idea because I had done a lot of work in CoinOp with doing color palette animation, and so I thought, well, why don't I make an object that looked like it was being drawn as renders as polygons, but use color palette animation to make them move faster, and I could do that without a blitter. And I thought this would be a really fun practical joke to play on the hardware team, because they were hard at work trying to get these boards up and running, and I thought, well, why don't I trick them by making this spinning ball using color palette animation. And I guess I did it in secret because someone told me that I put a curtain behind me so no one could see what I was working on. Is that?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Blanket. It was a blanket over.
A blanket overhead, because I didn't want to see what I was working. Yeah, I don't remember that, but I do remember that I wanted to surprise them. And
There was a blanket over the monitor, so we couldn't see what was on the monitor.
Yeah. And so I thought this would be great because, here we are waiting and waiting and waiting, and I thought, well, so I brought them over and I said, we got tired of waiting for you guys. We decided to do all this in software. So I showed them this spinning ball, and I don't remember their reaction, but they must have been pretty surprised. And anyway, I think I worked on a couple other of the early demos that were at the show.
You wrote the organ demo.
And I wrote the Fields demo. It started with a dancing line, but then it would.
And that's displaying the Fields demo.
And I did some other little examples of like what graphics would look like. With there was a screen that used the line draw and the plotting to make bar graphs and 3D bar graphs and pie charts and things. And anyway, that was really fun writing demos for the Amiga. And yeah, I don't know. That's pretty much what I remember.
Well, thank you, Sam. I could intersperse myself and talk a little bit about the bouncing ball, and then we'll move on to RJ. So the bouncing ball, as you've just heard, started with a demo that Sam wrote, and the spinning ball demo was a full-screen ball. It wasn't a little ball that could bounce, and it animated with all 32 colors. And so it was smoother than what we have now, because he was able to use more. But for me when I looked at that, and I'm thinking, well, I could do some tricks in hardware too. And I thought, and we have these play fields that you can move them individually, and by color palette tricks, I could kind of make a shadow appear. So I thought, okay, what can I do? And I've done, graphics in the past. I was partly a physics major one time, so all this, I knew how to make things bounce. And so first shrink the ball down, and then give me some room to make it bounce up and down. That took a while. I actually remember kind of starting working on this before going to CES, but not completing it. And then after I got and it was like that one night, probably, when we went back to when we were at CS, we went back to the show floor. RJ and I somehow we snuck in. I think maybe had some refreshments with us and
not maybe. We had beer.
And kept working on the demo until I had to reduce the number of colors because I was had to do more stuff with the play fields that individually interacted with it. And then it was, I think, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when I finally put the final touches on it. And it was just the ball bouncing up and down against a grid with a casted shadow. And we said, this is good enough. This is great. And then because we'd probably been up for 30 hours by then, and we fell asleep. And then we were woken up by these guys who came into the room and kind of like made a lot of noise and said, okay, we got to run around and go find more people to bring all these people back that we already showed all the old demos to, and now we want to show them this new demo.
There is a picture of us before they woke us up. The two of us are passed out with our faces on the table, somewhere floating around out there. There's an image of us.
I think that's a different time we were sleeping. I think that might have been June CES. But we were sleeping on the floor because that was in a booth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We did have carpet on top of the concrete.
Okay, so that was probably one of my last
Luxury.
talks about the CES. On to RJ now.
But the sound, the Boing.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, Sam didn't answer.
The Boing,
You want to hear the story?
Yeah, let Sam to answer.
all right, so the first demo was silent. Just so there was no boing, there was no beep, there was nothing like that. It was just the silent ball spinning, 3D, casting a shadow, and that apparently was enough to make some excitement. I'll let the next story about adding the audio to Sam.
Okay, so I saw the ball bouncing, and I thought that it should make a really powerful sound, you know, some kind of loud crashing noise, and I decided, I don't remember whose idea it was for sure, but we, the office, behind our office.
Well, let's go first a little bit, well, how we started.
Okay, sure.
Either you had your Apple II.
Yeah. I had Apple II with a card that could record 8-bit audio samples.
And then people were going around hitting things.
Okay.
To make some kind of noise.
Yeah.
And so we were getting like, you know, boing, 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 and all these different kinds of noise, but
It wasn't.
That's not what we wanted.
No, we wanted something much more exciting. I mean, and even slowing down the pitch of those little things wasn't impressive. And it turned out we had these foam bats that were, I guess they were purchased for. I think the joke was that if the hardware and software teams disagreed, we'd duel it out with these things.
Conflict resolution, that's what.
Yes. But so I took one of these foam bats, and I went over behind the building. There were these big metal garage doors, you know, the loading dock doors type things, and I just whacked the foam bat against the door, and it made a loud bang, and you could heard it echoing around in there, and so I think I got a bunch of cords, really long audio cables, and I ran. The Apple II was still in the office, so there was a long wire that I took out there with a mic. I think.
I remember, seeing you with the microphone.
Yeah.
And it was Bob Pariseau.
Bob Pariseau whacked.
Who went and whacked on the garage door.
Yeah, and it was a really cool sound. So that's what we went with.
That's where that came from.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, so what's the question we're answering here? What led up to CES, or?
That one.
No, but I mean, what am I supposed to now?
Okay, so primarily what went on, for what you remember, leading up to CES, what we're working on, and then your experience at CES.
Yeah, you know, it's this stuff. I've been realizing lately, I think there are a lot of people have written a lot of books about the Amiga. There's a lot of history recorded about it, but one of the things I think is there's still a lot of room for the folklore, or I'm not sure exactly what the right word is, but these stories that don't get a lot of airtime. How was that sound actually made? Although, you know, that's a leading question because it's a fun answer. And in fact, I had a friend come and visit me from Europe, it was about a year ago now, and he wanted to see the original Amiga building, if I wouldn't mind taking him over there, and I did. And he didn't want to see the original building. He wanted me to take him around back so he could go and pound on that door and you know, when Ron talks about we were almost out of money, not before CES, but we were almost out of money, but it's like one of those little told stories that Jay Miner, who was like a great hero to all of us, he went out and took out a second mortgage on his home so that Amiga could make payroll for the employees, so the employees didn't get scared and start looking for other jobs. A guy went out and took a second mortgage on his own home. He believed in the effort that much. Glenn talks about Pearl and this wonderful thing. He doesn't mention a bunch of us really believed in it, got behind him, invested some dough in the company. And then there was, you know, the afternoons helping him build the Pearl things. It was at which I learned, do not solder wearing shorts. It's an important lesson I learned helping Glenn.
Or play with hot melt glue guns.
But, you know, I don't know that there, you know, are any stories that haven't been told before. And I would happily tell stories again. There was, that frantic, wonderful pace where we both were looking at this being our great chance to show the world what we had worked on, and we're also filled with existential dread because we're almost out of money, and this is make or break. Either we looked good or we didn't. Either we sold the idea to investors, or we were all looking for work the next week. And
Well, that was a little late. That was a little later.
Yeah.
I remember sleeping in his office. I think we took turns sleeping in Dave Moore's office because I think at some point the software engineers just didn't go home. We stayed there for like at least a week or 10 days at a time.
Yeah, my job at that point in time was to buy snacks for the software engineers and bring them in because I knew they were going to be working overnight.
But later on, I think we rented a room at the Residence Inn, and then we would, because it was a lot closer to the office than when I drove to Milpitas where I lived. It was just easier to go like 3 minutes to get there, crash, and then come back as soon as we can. There was a story about, I guess, again, we're talking about sleeping, I guess. And yes, I did carry a pillow around with me. At times when I was really tired and busy trying to work. We had Sage 4s. They weren't the fastest machines, but they were really faster than a lot of other things that were out there. But when you got 4 guys trying to compile C code and generate your demos, generate your libraries and stuff, and they're all competing for this poor little 8 megahertz 68,000 processor, it would take several minutes for the compilation to get done to create your ROMs or the SREC files to then download and demo. And so I wrote a program called Beep so that I would start the compilation and then I'd type, because it had a type ahead buffer, I'd type Beep, which is a Control G. And when it got done, it would execute the Beep command, it would beep, and then it would wake up. So I'd start it, fall asleep, or try to fall asleep, and I actually did fall asleep, and it did wake me up like in a couple minutes. So we got a little bit, I mean, these are really tiny cat naps now. And so, yeah, it was like 10 days, I think, we were there straight, sleeping. Jay was sleeping there, too. And there's pictures of him sleeping on the couch. Oh, it was a crazy time. It was a wonderful time. It was a fantastic, I'll never experience that again. I knew that at that time, too, that although I hoped I would, 3DO was pretty close, but Amiga was fantastic.
Was that the show with the missing wire that we never figured out how?
I was going to say, it's the miracle of CES. It wasn't lead up to CES. It was after CES, and it's again one of these little told stories, folklore of Amiga days. I don't remember what it was. I think it was an interrupt signal. Whatever it was, we got back from CES, and when early days, you might have seen it, the early days of the Amiga, we didn't have the chips yet. All of the logic for the chips was implemented in these wire wrap boards that looked like little mini Cray computers. It was 7, 8, 9 different planes that had, each plane was populated with chips, and there was wires galore connecting the back plane with these beautiful blue wires, and then these ribbon cables connecting the planes to each other. They were just gorgeous. It was practical, really awesome engineering, and the engineers did just amazingly clean and awesome work all the time. It was just gorgeous. But it was like wild hair. It was amazing. It was an amazing tangle. And we got back from one of the CESs where we had transported this box back, and one of the hardware engineers is looking around inside the box for the loose wire because there's a wire missing from one of the boards, but there's no loose wire in the box. There's no loose wire anywhere. But this wire was from one of these boards where the board wouldn't come up, or I don't remember exactly how they noticed it.
Okay, what I remember was this is the first CES. Everything we finally got working fine. We get back and we start it up, and it's not working.
It wasn't working.
It wasn't working.
And I think it was the interrupt. It was
so something broke on the breadboards, and then Dave Needle looked at it, he's puzzling at it, and said, why is this not working? And he goes in, well, this wire, there's supposed to be a wire from here to here. but this is all wire wrap technology now. There weren't even, if a wire had broken off, you would see the little curly wires on it. There were no curly wires on the post. The wire was never on there, but somehow it worked during the show. And
it
when we
was
got back,
like we willed the thing to live. It couldn't live, but we were going to have it not work at the show.
there was another.
Yeah, Glenn. No, Glenn. What did you want to say about that?
Yeah, that's the story anyway. But then it worked when we put the wire in, right?
Right, and then it worked when we put the wire back in. Well, the first time we put the wire in, of course, it worked.
And it remains a mystery.
And
Yeah, it remains a mystery. So another story was, I was working, something got moved. This is before CES. We're in the Scott Boulevard, working away, and something got moved, or there was some new change to it, and it broke. And so the hardware guys come in to try to figure out what's wrong, and eventually they figure out, oh, it's these three, I think, interface chips that had broken, and it was broken in such a way that it was just dead. It just did some really funny stuff on the screen. So we pack everything up. We go to CES. So everything's working. Pack everything up. We go to CES. We start it up, and I notice it's doing. And everyone's saying, oh, it's broke. But I remember it's doing something that I remember we were doing before. And I said, you know what? I think it's these three chips right here. and I remember if Dave Needle's story, part of the story was, oh, let me think about it, and then he fixed it. But I said, we saw this before, and it was me and Dave Needle he had solved it the first time, and I just recognized the patterns that were on the screen. And then it was fixed right away, like within 5 minutes, and all the execs and all the other Amiga people that were says, boy, you fixed that really fast.
It was during Amiga that the hardware guys taught me the idea that hardware chips, the magic that makes them work is that they have this blue smoke inside of them. And if you let out the blue smoke, that's it. They stop working, man.
All about the blue smoke.
And speaking of Dave Needle, he's not here, sadly. He'd love to be up on this stage. But pre-CES story about Dave Needle that I remembered the other day. Again, a folklore story, doesn't get told very often. Dave Needle, when he joined Amiga, he was coming off a lot of success in his arcade business, and he was feeling really cocky, really cocksure about him and his abilities. And he walked into Amiga like, you know, this god. Yes, I might allow you to hire me. And he acted like this arrogant ass through the entire interview. People didn't like him. They decided to pass on him. And they passed on Dave Needle and told him, you don't get a job with us, sorry, you know, you were like arrogant jerk and no one really liked you.
Do you remember the name of his company, RJ?
What's that?
Remember the name of his company?
Yeah, and he was appalled by this, that he had blown the opportunity at Amiga. And so he came back the next day, hat in hand, to Jay Miner and said, please, I really want a job at this company, and I'll do anything. I'll do anything. I'll sweep the floor in the lab if you want me to. Just let me have a job at the company. And Jay Miner said, okay, and gave him a job sweeping the lab floor. And that's what Dave Needle did when he first got to the company. And he'd be sweeping the floor, and he'd lean over someone's table and say, well, you know, if you flip the capacitor, then this and that. Yeah. Oh, good, thanks. And then he'd go back to sweeping the floor. But tell the story.
Yeah, no, I visited him at his office, I guess you call it, and he, who was working with
Stan Shepard.
Yeah, Sam Shepard, right, the two of them. Yeah, they called their company Software Hardware Innovative Technology. And they had their logo was a little roll of toilet had a roll of toilet paper on their business card.
Oh, it was so great. It was the best Easter egg. They had one of the arcade games. No, every one that they did. It would still work to this day. If you made it onto the high score table of any of the games that they did, it let you put in, your 3 initials. And if you put in SHI, the game would pause, and if you then, while it was sitting there pausing, went ahead and put in a T anyway, it would hang on the last letter. It would, as if you hadn't entered the last letter. It would hang there and let you put in the last letter again, and if you put in the T then suddenly the SHI would turn into an icon of rolling toilet paper. It was this wonderful little Easter egg that they had. And it's stories like that are going to get lost in time. That's why I want to write a folklore book about this.
Yeah.
I mean, and just sit us down at, meetings like this, have lunch together, and just get you guys to tell these stories, the stuff that you remember.
Okay, we got one more. Mike.
Mike.
Oh. Mike Slivkak.
Hello.
He was... So, I will let Mike introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Slivkak. Before I came to Amiga, I did a few other things. I worked on in-circuit emulators at Intel. I wrote some code for a multimeter and did some other things through time. And when it came down to it, I was a manager of software QA at Amiga. But before I got there, I was over at Olivetti. They were building a PC clone called the M14 Olivetti. Yeah, right. Anyway, so the thing of it was, so one of the things they wanted me to do was test the floppy drive. So I put in the floppy, sure enough, it formatted it. I thought, what happens if you turn it upside down? Because the floppy has an offset hole on it, and if you don't have the index mark, it's not going to find the sector. Put it upside down and formatted it. And my boss said, oh, great, you found this great problem. Wonderful. So that made a little bit of churn for me. But anyhow, so manager of software QA at Amiga, and all these great people around him, these rock stars are working here. All these guys that are up here, just amazing. I mostly worked on the software side, so I only had some interaction with a few of the hardware guys, and not really Ron so much. Glenn, we did some things together. I think I helped debug some of the Porsche chip lines on that, make sure that worked. And it had, well, I mean, and we found them and fixed them. That was all good stuff. Yeah. So, and I wrote an original Bressenham algorithm in C, and it was slow. That was damn slow. Good thing RJ came along and put the blitter together, because I think it was more of an incentive for him to do that because it was so damn slow. Yeah, so, and I came down close to CES show. There was the one thing we haven't talked about, maybe because of it was kind of misogynist, was the bubblehead. The bubbleheaded girl walking down the street, and the dog would come by, and the fire hydrant would raise its arms up when the dog came by to protect itself. And there was a time when you were working on that code, and you were kind of ticked off, because like, oh, what's the exclusive OR in C? And I said, oh, it's the hat symbol. Yeah. So that was just one the frustration was so intense that you almost forgot what you're doing, how do I do this, kind of thing. So it was like all these little things that are going on. There were small things, my contribution, you don't even know about it. I mean, the keyboard for it was, Bob Burns did the driver for it. I wrote the controller for it originally for the Amiga Corp in 8048. So we had that put together, and Bob was instrumental in helping me figure out the problems I was having getting it together. So boom, we get it out there. And one guy over here said he has a Amiga 1000 just like he had it when he was working on it, but he claimed he had a 6502 chip, and I go like, no, the first one was 8048. So when Commodore had it, yeah, they tried to change that, and they did successfully make a much better keyboard with the 6502 in it. So cool. So what? I'm kind of like, close your eyes a second. Think of the movie Galaxy Quest. The people on the deck, you have all these superstars there, and you have this one guy at the back the Sam Rockwell character with the mustache, Guy Fleegman. I'm the Guy Fleegman of I'm not really, but I mean, it's just thought of that was kind of like,
You thought of that?
yeah, it's just an analogy thing. So, but it was such a great time working with some wonderful people in a environment. You know, when we're done working something, I would still go to a homebrew computer club and hang out there. So this time when these things were being developed was still a very creative, it's marvelous creative sharing environment in the Santa Clara Valley. And you know, it's changed a bit, but I think it's a different kind of sharing now. And the fact that everybody here has some interest in something that was started in the 1980s, that's pretty amazing to me. That just gets me like, wow. Everybody still loves working on them or working with them, and you know, had them in the past. Maybe all the stories that you tell about your experiences are what makes it interesting to me to hear your stories. You know, you guys are, and ladies, you're phenomenal.
So I want to take the time to introduce another member of the Amiga team, Bob Burns. Apparently,
Stand up, stand up.
Bob Burns.
Yay! Microphone.
So I have a question for you, Dale. What role did your mother play in our team?
What role did Dale's mom play in our team?
I may have forgotten.
Oh, okay. So every time we had this talk about whether we were doing something that was too nerdy, it was, okay, what would Dale's mom do? She was our touchstone for, no, you got to make it so that Dale's mom is going to be able to use this product.
Right. As if she was the user, make sure that she would be able to use it, and my dad. Bob wrote the text code that draws the graphics text for the Amiga, and as Sam has already said, he wrote the 68,000 driver that talked to the key, or that Mike Slivkak had said.
And if I may, the original Amiga shipped with a font called Topaz. But if you read in the comments of the source code, many of us, myself in particular, will always think of that font as the Carla font, which is what it was originally called while we were developing it. And so if I may ask Carla to stand up and take a bow.
And Carl's still here? He just walked out? So I think most everyone knows Carl, the creator of the exact preemptive multitasking kernel, incredibly brilliant guy. And he wasn't ready with any stories yet. So I think, how much time do we have left?
So we're running out of time now, so we got to start to wrap it up.
Okay, so I think we're pretty much wrapped up. Are there any, we can go to some questions?
We can do a few questions because we have about 5 minutes or less.
Okay, well, I'm sure that you'll get us, if you find us in the booth where the Amiga stuff is, there may be some more stories that pop up as our brain cells get reinvigorated with visual reminders of what was going on. A lot of that stuff is, there's a Sony TV there that is from the 1984 CES booth that I got rejuvenated. And so I plan to have that hooked up to something to show. It actually belonged to RJ.
I have one more story, if we got time for one more. Again, a little told story of Amiga development before CES.
Sure.
This one is from before the CES, where we actually had chips, and for the first time we were going to be able to show actual chips, and this was the make or break one. We either had the actual chips at the CES or we didn't.
So that would have been June CES.
Yeah. So, and we got the chips back, and they didn't work. Take it away, Glenn.
So the disk controller didn't work.
And that was it. Company was doomed.
We tracked it down to when we had traced the things, gone with the schematics and the layout on the floor of covered the entire floor of the Amiga building and traced with yellow marker, one against the other. We had missed one inverter in the disk controller. At some point, I figured out that if we could cut one of the wires, it would work.
Cut one of the wires in a chip.
5-micron NMOS, 5-micron aluminum.
It gets better.
So there was this X-Acto knife. And I got a microscope and the X-Acto knife, and I broke 5 chips, and I was about to give up, and Stan, who's in Alaska touring in an RV right now, said, "Don't give up." And I had forgotten that I hadn't given up, but he told me. He said, I kept going, and apparently I managed to, in one case, cut the right wire. And it worked.
Okay, he glosses over this, man. Yeah.
Now, to be fair, don't try this today, because in the place that we could put one transistor, you now can put roughly 30,000.
But they went with this giant microscope and an X-Acto knife, and they're going to go find one trace inside that chip and cut just the one. And I remember it looked a lot like if you had a battleship and you were coming in with a battleship. It was just amazing. But he got it to work. Yay!
Unfortunately, I think we're out of time for questions. If you find us anywhere, you ask questions if you'd like.
There's a table outside if you guys wanted to hang out.
Okay, yeah.
Check out the booth.
So we got to get on to the next session.
Next.